maybe in one of your relatively uninformed flurries, you ended up establishing a relationship with someone who was really not good for you. And that might mean, well, it was just a bad personality match. Or it might mean they really weren't good for you because, you know, you can get pretty unlucky and you can get tangled up with someone who's very deceitful and very malevolent and who could care less about you, or maybe who even wants to hurt you. And then you can establish a trusting relationship with them, or at least you trust them. And then one day, you know, you find out that they are not who they said they were, or even more importantly, they are not who you thought they were. And so then maybe you're in a committed relationship and they betray you with someone else. And so then you think, well, there you are at home, and you're perfectly happy about being at home, and then your partner comes home, and for one reason or another, you find out that they're having an affair, or that they've betrayed you, or that they've lied to you in some other spectacularly important way. And maybe it's a lover, and maybe it's a family member, and maybe it's a sibling, and maybe it's a friend, whatever. It doesn't matter. And so here's the way of thinking about it. The minute before they come home, you're in one place. And you remember, a place isn't just a place, right? A place is a place in time, because we live in space-time. We live in time and place. And what that means is you can be in the same place in 1 minute and a completely different place in the next minute, even if you haven't even moved. And so place is a very, very complicated idea. So you're sitting at home and you're watching Oprah, and you're perfectly content to do that, and then the person comes home and the bottom of your world falls out. And then all of a sudden you're not where you thought you were. And it's a really weird place that you are now, because it's not where you were, that's for sure. But you also don't know where it is, because you don't know who that person is that's in that room with you. You don't know what your past with them was, or what it meant, or anything else about it, because it was predicated on absolute misperceptions. So none of your memories about those events are valid, even though you have them as memories. And then you have a worse problem, which is if you're betrayed badly enough, not only are you not going to understand your immediate past with that person, oh, and by the way, your future's also gone, so that's a big problem, as is your present has become radically more complex. But it's worse than that, because if you're really betrayed, you're also going to think, who am I that I could be that stupid? And then you're going to think, what is a human being that they can be that corrupt? And so not only have the fundamentals been kicked out of the substructure of your perceptions, but your notion of what it means to be you and what it means to be human might have been seriously disrupted. And you know, the thing about that is that's a non-trivial event. People call that traumatic. It's like a physical wound. In fact, it certainly, if the trauma is great enough, it can produce a psychophysiological wound, because that sort of trauma, a deep betrayal is a good example, will damage your brain. And maybe you'll recover from it, and maybe you won't. And one of the ways that that's been represented forever in mythological stories is by being swallowed up by a subterranean beast. It's something that comes up from the depths and pulls you down, and then you're in it. Now, why is that? Well, that's an extraordinarily complicated question, but here's the answer as nearly as I can tell. We evolved a very complicated neuropsychological system to signal alarm. So that's anxiety, threat sensitivity, right? And that makes us freeze, for example. And when you look at how an animal uses that system, let's say a mammal, just to keep it simple, because we're all mammals, and so we can kind of understand mammals. So if a rabbit sees a wolf, for example, it's going to freeze so that the wolf can't see it. And if a rat smells a cat, even if it has never smelled a cat in its whole life, it's going to also freeze. And interestingly, with rats, if you put rats in a natural environment, which means they get to have little rat dominance hierarchies and little rat families, and they're not like little white rats alone in a cage. They're happy family rats. And they've got their burrows and they live in their little societies, and maybe there's a part of their territory where they can go get food. And they're used to that, so they'll scurry out there in the day, kind of hiding because they don't like light, or maybe they'll scurry out at night because rats are night things. And they'll get their food and they'll eat it or bring it back, or whatever they do, share it with their family, or at least bring it back. Well, let's say that you put a cat out there, or maybe you even just put a cat there and take it away so that the place smells like cat. Well, if one of those rats goes out there and sees that cat, first of all, it's going to freeze, and it is not a happy thing. Because imagine, you're a rat, and a thing that's 4 times as big as a lion suddenly appears on your front yard. Do you believe that there are things that you should do? Like, is there anyone here who doesn't believe that? Or more importantly, is there anyone here who doesn't act like they believe it? So you wake up in the morning and you think, yeah, there's a bunch of things I should do. Or there's some things I should do next week. Or there's some things I should do with my life. Yes? That's a common thought? Does anyone not think that way? Okay, so if you're not thinking that way, you end up pretty depressed, because then you think, well, there's nothing I should do with my life. And that's not such a happy thought, because life is hard, and then if there's nothing to do with it, well, all you're there stuck with is a bunch of suffering, and that doesn't seem like a very good idea. Okay, so then you might say, well, what exactly does should mean? Well, it means that you have a moral obligation of some sort. You might say, well, you've decided that yourself. And the answer to that is, like, no, wrong. You haven't decided that yourself. Are you kidding? You'd be a complete psychopath if you decided that by yourself. Right? I mean, if you're even the vaguest bit civilized, then you decide what it is that you should do, or what you should do manifests itself within you as a context of a dialogue that you're continually having with yourself, but also with everyone around you. And not only with everyone around you, but with the entire history of mankind. Because we're all historical creatures, and what you think you should do is being shaped by what your parents think, and that was shaped by what their parents thought, and that was shaped by what their parents thought, and so on back into the depths of history, as far back as you can possibly imagine, both historically and biologically. So in some sense, there is a call to action within people. Now, in any sort of quest story, like The Hobbit, let's say, or The Lord of the Rings for that matter, the story always starts with a call to action, right? For some reason or another, the little hobbit character, which, by the way, is you, the hobbits live in this little protected place, and they're not very big, and they're not very smart, and they don't know about the wide world beyond them, where the great forces of good and evil are at combat. And one hobbit, who's a little bit more adventurous than the rest, gets called upon to act, and in the Hobbit stories, it's usually the wizard who manages it, right? So it's a magical figure of some sort who's extraordinarily wise and extraordinarily old, who might as well be God for all intents and purposes, who says, it's time for you to go and become a thief. Well, that's what happens in The Hobbit, right? It's a very weird thing.